Today's another very important component in a coaching conversation, which is the power of questions. Questions is a critical part of a conversation, of having a conversation, in fact. So, welcome to Module 6, the power of questions. In today's module, we're going to cover what is a question? What is a powerful question in a coaching conversation? The strategy behind asking powerful questions, and the psychology behind questions. The most powerful moment in a coaching conversation is not actually the act of offering the question. It's the silence that follows it. In this way, it means the question is creating a moment of reflection, of introspection, of looking inside from the other person. It's an invitation to go deeper within themselves. What's so special about the silence then? Studies conclude that complex questions increase cognitive load, requiring silence to process information. Slowed speech and pauses reduce mental strain, enabling deeper reflection. Remember the activity that we did a few modules back where I asked you about your favorite number and then about you flowing into a number? Giving your favorite number is a very logical, data-based response. It's easy to answer, it sits in our conscious mind, and it's measurable. However, asking you about your body flowing into a number is a more creative response. It's not in the form of data or a fact and something that we can easily extract from our conscious mind. It's more reflective, requires you to go deeper within yourself to find that answer, and it's not measurable. Let me offer some even deeper questions around the numbers scenario. Imagine this best version of you showing up when you're upset. What would that look like? This question prompts a connected experience. It's connecting the best version of you when you're upset. That's what it's looking for as a response. What would this best version number of you look like? This question prompts deeper understanding. When you think of best version, what is this best version? This question prompts deeper meaning. What makes this best version of you exist in this number? This question prompts an exploration of values. What positive difference does this number mean to you? This question prompts gain frames and possibilities. See how many playful, creative, and exploratory questions that you can create as a result of having this material on the table, your favorite number. These are all purposefully created, reflective questions. I created these on purpose to evoke more from within your unconscious or subconscious mind. I'm really curious about you and what that number means relative to your experience. In essence, I'm actually speaking to your mind. I've started to create a safe space for your mind to expand and become more reflective and allow me to see who you are. This is what it means to reverse engineer a prompt or a question. You can learn to create a question or a prompt to seek a certain type of answer, not the answer. There's a difference. The answer itself comes from the other person that's answering your question. However, what you can do is actually create the environment, set up the question so that it gives you a certain type of response. And this type of response has certain characteristics that will serve where you are in the conversation. A great one that you've learned before is, what would you like to have happen? This question is designed to be reflective in nature and produce gain frames. That's how intentional it is. And I hope you've been trying it and seeing what kind of answers people are giving you. Here's a great thought starter on what is a question.
Questioning enables us to organize our thinking around what we don't know.
I personally love this answer of what is a question. Questioning allows us to organize our own minds around what we don't know. There exists two layers here. So in the context of coaching, what a question creates in the moment is where I am exploring something that I don't know, and I'm allowing you to explore something that you don't know by me acting as a mirror to play back those observations to you. That's the power of the observations. This position of not knowing and being curious is actually a very important trait to being an effective coach. It's actually the start of creating powerful questions. And there really is a formula to creating powerful questions. It is an intentional and creative strategic reverse engineering exercise. So it can get quite technical. And this is why I love it so much, because I love the reverse engineering space and I love the thinking space. However, what you want to add on top of it as a layer afterwards is really you, your own personality, your own traits, your own leadership style after you understand and learn how to use that muscle technically. So beyond questions, there are two other categories that can prompt this reflective thinking space or invitational space in conversations. The first is a statement and the second is an invitation. Statements are declarative sentences or observations intentionally crafted to invite the other person to reflect and explore. For example, tell me more, or that sounds challenging. Invitational prompts could be statements or actions that act as prompts. The best one in coaching is the pause. There is a lot of power and psychology in pausing. Other invitational prompts can include nods, smiles, or other gestures. So, where do we start? Let me share with you two different conversations of the same scenario. Pay attention to the questions. The first scenario goes like this. Your leader asks you, "Hey, how are you doing with the project?" You respond, "I'm doing good. We have a major update coming up with the steering committee, and I'm now preparing all the inputs for that." Your leader then adds, "That's great. I've heard a lot of great things coming out of the project now. I have a meeting with one of the countries this week and want to hear their feedback." And they go on and on about all the meetings they have coming up. The second scenario goes like this. Your leader asks you, "Hey, how are you doing with the project?" You respond, "I'm doing good. We have a major update coming up with the steering committee, and I'm now preparing all the inputs for that." Your leader then adds, "Great. How are you finding the quality of the inputs?" You reply, "Better than last time. I've briefed them once already, and it's getting better." Better is good. At least we're progressing. What would allow you to continue improving this? Your leader asks. All right, great. So my questions to you now, after you've just observed those exchanges are, 1, how much content or material was put on the table between the two scenarios? Yes, the second scenario had a lot more material to work with. This is facilitated by asking questions. The second question for you is, how many questions do you think the leader prepared before going into the conversation? Only one, and that's the conversation opener. Hey, what's going on with the project? That's it. So where did the rest of the questions come from then for the second scenario? Yes. All the questions that came afterwards in the conversation were first created in the moment, and secondly, with the material that you were giving the leader. This is good. Here are some observations we're making about questions. 1, questions create content for us, the other person's content. This is important because a coaching conversation serves the other person. So we need content from the other person, or else we'll just be working with content from ourselves, from our own minds. They are the source of the material in a coaching conversation. That's what a coaching moment means. Remember, as a leader, as a coach, we're facilitating this co-creation process of their possibilities and potential. The second observation about questions is that they're not created ahead of time. They're actually created in the now, in the moment, as the other person is speaking and when they're finished speaking. We can't know what they're going to say or how they're going to respond in the moment. I ask this question of many of the leaders that I work with. Do you ask a question ultimately to respond, or do you ask a question to understand? It is in the latter that powerful coaching moments are born. It is about the other person that we're engaging with in the conversation. It's not about our own agendas or perspectives or that we want to share what we want to share. And that's where we have to be careful about leading questions and our own lenses that we're putting on when we're creating questions. And that's why that piece around self-awareness is so important. Are we aware of the deductions, the assumptions, our own perspectives that we're layering on in the questions that we're creating? If we don't ask questions, we're simply talking to ourselves. It's like a monologue. Let's go back to the beginning. This is where we want to start. We want to make sure that we have material, we have enough content, their content on the table in order to have a meaningful conversation and for us to use meaningful material to create our questions. So what makes a powerful question in a coaching conversation? To examine this more closely, we're not only just looking at the question. We need to also be looking at the response, which is the partner of the question, because what you formulate as a question actually produces the type of answer. So how many types of answers can exist? Here's how we classify answers in coaching. In the mind space, you can have either a reflective or a logical answer. In perspectives, you can have a response that is either in a gain frame, loss frame, or neither, no frames. In the domains, you can have a response that is a thinking, feeling, being, or doing domain of the other person. And there's a relativity perspective, which is the response is relating to the what of their situation and the who of the person. We'll get more into this in the next module. What these categories allow is really breaking down the type of responses that can be available depending on the question that you ask. And you thought asking a question was simply asking a question. It's way more fun than that. You can be so intentional about the quality of the response based on the quality of the questions. And that's where the power comes in. I tell my students all the time, actually, garbage in, garbage out. So the quality of the question determines the quality of the answer. Remember, you need an opener question to start the person generating material to put on the table for you to take to create your next question. Any of these opening questions could be your starter question. For example, what's on your mind? What's going on? What would you like to talk about? Where can we start? All of these work. So get creative and create your own. You can find a full list of opener examples in the worksheets in this module. So now that you've opened the conversation and there's some material to work with, the next piece has two parts to it. The first part is, what are you curious about as a leader from their response? And the second part is, where are you in the coaching process right now? Remember, we covered the recipe of a conversation. This is important to know because depending where you are in that creation of the recipe, that will determine the type of question that you're asking as well. For example, if you're in the step of cultivating learning, the question that you're going to be creating is going to be around their learning journey, what they're learning in the moment, what's emerging for them, those type of questions. And those type of responses tend to be a little more reflective, and they're actually drawing out from themselves what's emerging for them. Or you're at the start of the conversation and you're not sure yet what they want. This tends to mean that there's nothing to anchor into in helping them create something that's positive and possible. And so your question would be structured around harvesting, well, what is it that you really want? Because without this, the conversation can go all over the place. These type of responses of what is it that you really want tend to be more reflective and in a gain frame. If you keep getting loss frames as response, this means the question is not structured in a way to help them flip their loss frames into gain frames. Well, what would you like to have happen is a great question to allow that to flip for them. So in a way, you could say that you are literally engineering your question so that you're creating a certain type of response. We are not leading them to a particular answer, only a type of answer. How they respond, what they say is completely up to them. And the type of answer that you're looking for is very different depending where you are in the coaching conversation. A coaching conversation has a beginning, which is around expanding the mind, finding what they really want. It has a middle, which is actually building that bridge. And it has an end, which is around learning and actions. So this is a great start to just set the base on how to create powerful questions or prompts in a coaching conversation. let's walk through a use case to show you how you can really engineer or create that powerful question. And this is where I'm going to introduce what's known as coach's choice, because at the very end, you as a coach have creative choice in the question that you want to deliver based on the principles of crafting and creating a powerful question.
All right, let's do this dissection for Module 6, which is really exploring the power of questions. The conversation dissection in this situation is actually what we're going to look at is what the other person said first, and then what are the options on the table based on what we learned just now on how to craft a question. So welcome to the lab. This is the whole point. It's experimental. So that means we're actually going to put all the options on the table. And that's where coach's choice comes in, is what are you curious about? Where do you want to go down? That's where you actually bring in your own lens of a leader as a coach. So we are going to play out the different techniques that we've learned. And it's really experimenting with how each of these questions creates a different response based on the same material. That is the fascinating part. And then next is come up with your own and think about how you would drive this conversation going forward. So just to recap is, do we have content? That's the first and very most important part. And then the part that's really you as the leaders or coaches, what are you curious about? And then I'll walk you through the rest of the questions about where we are in the process. So just to recap some of the frames and the mind spaces and the characteristics of the responses available here, which you can reference also in the worksheets. All right, so here's kind of the thinking process around what you could ask yourself very technically as you're learning this process. The first is, where are you in the coaching process or the coaching recipe? Be clear with that. The second is, what type of response are you looking for then based on where you are in the coaching process? Then, can you find what they really want? Is that available for you to harvest and show them? And then what are the frames offered? What domain are they in? And based on this is, what would be meaningful observations to play back to show them in relation to where we are in the process and the type of response we're looking for. That will then really support you in crafting your question. All right, so let's start with a very simple type of material or simple material on the table. The teammate comes to you and says, I just want to share with you that I'm not sure I can make tonight's all hands event tonight. All right, let's talk through this. And I'm going to answer these questions down here so you can see the logic and the thinking process. Where are you in the coaching process? For this example, this is actually at the start of the conversation, right? So start at the conversation. We've just opened the conversation pretty much at the beginning. All right, so that's that answer there. What type of response are you looking for? So actually, in this case, when we've just started the conversation, what we really want to do is expand the mind because we are looking for what they really want, right? Okay, so why are we here? What's this conversation all about? That's what I'm looking for. And all they've said right now is that they just want to share with me that they might not make tonight's all-hand event. All right. Is there a what they really want? Kind of. They're not sure. Actually, we're not sure there is really anything they want. So no, not readily available. All right. And then the next piece here is around what frames are offered. Based on this, I want to share with you that I'm not sure I can make tonight's all-hand event. Interestingly enough, you might initially say, oh, it's a loss frame because they're saying they might not make it. However, there's also another perspective. Loss frame is they won't make it. That's one lens. There's also an interesting gain frame here. Can you see it? There might be two actually, or maybe one. No, maybe two. So the first one, and see how I'm actually doing this in the moment because I actually don't know what's going to emerge until they tell me. So some of the gain frames on the table, the first one I want to table is, oh, you want to share something. That's a gain. That's amazing because there's something that they actually want to offer the conversation. There's also another interesting gain frame here is, I'm not sure I can make tonight's all hands. Oh, what is that? What is that they're thinking about? All right. They're actually recognizing there's a position that they have within them. So this could be, or the other gain frame is you recognize something, whatever that happens to be. You recognize you can't make it. You recognize you're not available. You recognize there's a clash. Whatever that subject matter is completely up to you as coach's choice. So this is interesting, right? What you look at in terms of what the person said actually also determines on whether you can see the gain frames and loss frames. Coach's choice in what you see, coach's choice in what you want to play back. So I'm going to just highlight this, how this is quite fascinating and that actually they all exist together at the same time. All right. What domain are they in? All right. When they say, I want to share with you, I'm not sure I can make tonight's all hands event tonight. What domain do you think they're in? What does it feel like? I would say they're in probably either doing and or thinking domain. So they're actually doing the act of telling you and they're thinking about what's going on tonight. All right. So next question is, what would be meaningful to mirror back in relation to where you're in the process and what you're looking for? All right. What type of response are we looking for? So if we're looking for what they really want, that tends to be in a gain frame and with an expanded mind, right? So then at some we could ask right away, so what do you want? Right? Or why are you telling me this? Right? Like those questions are also valid in a conversation. But in this way, why are you telling me this closes the mind. So what we want to do is open and expand the mind, right? And so what we want to do is expand the mind here. Expand the mind and find what they're looking for. Gain frame. So that's essentially now the strategy of how we're going to prompt this next part. So what are we going to make as observations? That's the first part. And then what question would support you in this? All right. So what I'm curious about is, all right, what are they looking? Why are they telling me? Actually, that is what I'm curious about as a coach. And this is coach's choice too, right? So there's a few things that you could go through. You could explore, I want to share. So I'm going to break this down into paths, right? So the first thing you could explore is you could say, you explore. So let's say what I'm curious about. Let's talk about this. And I'm going to number this so it's much easier. So for example, I'm curious about why they want to share this with me. And obviously not ask it like that. The other thing I'm curious about is, what are they not sure about? What are they not sure about? Those are probably the only two big things on the table. And so coach's choice on what you want to go. So with this, what you can mirror back here in this case is share, I hear you want to share something with me. And then what would prompt that? Tell me more. That could work. What else? You could also say, what's going on? That would also expand the mind and create more material for us to work with. Again, this is completely up to you on where you want to go, but just keep in mind that I was interested in hearing about this gain frame perspective as you want to share something. I hear you want to share something with me. Tell me more what's going on. There's another path here, which you can also talk about, is I hear you're not sure about something. Or I hear you, we talked about this one as well. I hear you recognize something. I hear you recognize that you can't make it tonight. So those are the two that you can put on the table, right? You're not sure about something, but you also recognize that you can't make it tonight. And there are different paths as well. So let's expand this. If we wanted to ask about expanding the mind and looking for what they want, what would we ask here? So you would start with, I hear you're not sure about something. What's that you're not sure about? And we continue to flesh that out. Or if we use this one, I hear you recognize that you can't make it tonight. Oh, thank you for sharing. What would you like to have happen? So I'm going to just pause right here and allow you to see how one sentence, we're going to go back here, of this other person's statement, based on all this thinking, allowed us to generate 3 different paths of making observations and asking a question or creating a question. So that's really in essence how you can actually engineer or reverse engineer based on these questions the prompt or the question that you're looking for.
Well done. It goes to show that you can really engineer a question. However, there is still a lot of creative choice, especially coach's choice, around what you're curious about and that you can continue to explore. There is, though, however, a little formulaic way in how you think and structure questions. It is very intentional, but only if you understand how the mind works. And that's what it means to really start working on and building that muscle, this muscle of asking questions. And yeah, there are all these components on the table to think about, but that's where you become your own experiment, your own laboratory within yourself. How are you asking questions? What are you noticing is on the table that informs you of how to ask and build questions? I would really encourage you to start experimenting with this muscle in your day-to-day life, professionally and personally. Now that you have this muscle and you know what it means to have this muscle and work and build on it, go out into the world and start experimenting with the different types of things that you're observing in what you're noticing, what you're paying attention to, and how the questions react or create different responses in the other person. Here are a few tips to get you started as you go forward on building and practicing this muscle. Just like observations, keep the questions simple. Less is more, because the more words you add to the question, the more processing the other person needs to do in answering the question. You may notice that in some of the questions that I create, I repeat some of the words they use. Absolutely, because this word is coming from them, so they'll know it already and it's familiar to them. I'm not introducing new words, but what I do is create the structure around the word they've used and give it back. Next is to use open-ended questions. You'll notice that I tend to use what and how. That's all you really need based on my experience. And even a why question can be structured as a what. What happens when someone asks you, why did you do that? Even if you asked it smiling and in a light tone, what is the mind's initial position of this question? It's often perceived as a challenge question where we need to give justification or explain something. The mind gets in a little defensive mode, and what happens is that it closes a little bit. A why question can be repositioned as a what question by asking, what makes it important that you do that? Can you feel how different the question lands? It's inviting, it's curious, and there's no justification feel to it. So the mind naturally opens up. This is how to expand the mind in a gentle and safe way. Are you going to do that? Isn't that a great suggestion? These are not open-ended questions. They're close-ended because they're actually forcing a yes or no. Or how about looking at it from this perspective? It's actually disguised as an open-ended question, but it's not. It's a how question, but only tabling one perspective. An open-ended version of that question could be, what do you think of the available perspectives? I could go on and on about all the close-ended and leading questions that we unconsciously ask in our day-to-day conversations. This comes natural to us as human beings, and if we're not aware of the questions that we're asking or the words that we're using, this really narrows the conversation because what you're really limiting is the scope of the type of responses that is available, and it limits the creation of possibilities. The next is offering one question at a time. There's so many times that we ask stacked questions. Stacked questions are questions that are like stacked on top of each other, and they sound like this. What do you mean by delaying it? Do you mean it's going to be late? This leader tried to be curious by asking a first open-ended question, but gave themselves away with the assumption of the second close-ended question. We can see so much about the leader's thinking simply by the two questions that they've asked. I see leaders stacking questions all the time without realizing it, and it's not on purpose. Sometimes they're actually processing in the moment, so they'll ask one question, but like, no, something else sounds better, so they'll ask another question afterwards. And so really exercising a pause to ask a question is very useful to help you really structure and craft the right question for you. And this is why I encourage transcribing your conversations, just as experimental. You don't have to show anyone but yourself, right? And so what you want to do is record your conversation, have it transcribed, and then look at yourself. How many open-ended questions? How many stacked questions? What type of questions am I creating? Where is the question coming from? Those are very useful data points for yourself as a leader. And finally, create the questions that reflect who you are. While I teach this very technically, it's a space I love. And yes, really understanding the technicality, the engineering around creating a question is important. What you also want to do then is wrap around who you are as a leader. Use the metaphors that connect with you. Use the prompts that work for you. Use the pieces of what they're putting on the table that work around you and the curiosity that you're interested in. At the very end, there's no right or wrong way to create a question. There's just a more powerful question or a less powerful question. But at the end, a question is a question. And if we're in service to the process of helping the other person really create impossibilities, then you've done your job as a leader, as a coach. Another tip is to slow down the delivery of your question. What that's going to enable actually is slowing down your mind as well. That will give you time to really think through, all right, what's on the table? What do I want to create now? Where am I in the process? And by doing that, what you'll do is really synthesize and be clear on the type of question you want to ask and the type of response that you would like to create. The amazing thing about slowing your delivery down is that the other person tends to mirror our behavior. And through slowing down, what you're going to allow is the other person to slow down as well, so that they're actually accessing more reflective spaces in order to create the responses that are more meaningful. Well done on this module. Not easy, I know, and I'm still practicing after all these years on asking powerful questions, but that's the point. It's to evolve and build this muscle over and over through experimenting with yourself and with the people that you engage with. And now we're going to move into the next module where we bring everything together. I can't wait because it gets so exciting to really have everything land together and see it as a complete process. See you in the next module.